Hi, my name is Bob, a very grateful member of Al-Anon. In AA, I'm known as Goldine's husband. Always, when a member of AA introduces me to somebody, said, "This is Goldine's husband." So I'm completely, I have no identity in AA at all. But it's real nice to be here. This is the second time I've been here. I was here a number of years ago. And nice to be invited back. I appreciate Kim for inviting me. And host and hostess, Bob and Francis down there, have really been looking after me and giving me, taking good care of me. So I appreciate being here. The last time I was here, it seems to me it was raining out here, and we had it in there, and it was just as cold as it could be. And I was telling Bob and Francis that when it gets less than 80, I get cold, so being from Southern California. But I say I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And when I first came to Al-Anon, I heard people saying, "I'm a grateful member, grateful, grateful, grateful." And I thought it was some sort of a rote or ritual that people used. And then following meditation one morning, I suddenly realized that I was grateful. Because I had found a way of living. I had found something I'd been looking for all of my life. And I'd found it in Al-Anon, how to be comfortable. Then I did some thinking, which sometimes is dangerous. What is it? In AA, they say, go to a lot of meetings, don't drink between meetings. And Al-Anon, go to a lot of meetings, don't think between meetings. But anyway, I was thinking, what got me here? Well, it was being married to an alcoholic wife. So I had to conclude that I was grateful I was married to an alcoholic. Now, that sounds strange to somebody where there might still be some drinking going on in the home. But if you stay around Al-Anon long enough, I think you'll understand what I was talking about. Because there's total change in my life, my perception of life as a result of the Al-Anon program here. Quite a number of years ago, we were invited up to Vancouver, Canada, to speak up there. And, it was a fabulous place up there. It was a 5-star hotel. And we rented a car, made a little vacation out of it, and drove around the islands a while. And then it was time to go into the hotel and register. And as my wife was sitting out in the car while I went and registered, and as I was walking back to the car, I thought, what did I ever do to deserve this? And then I realized that before Al-Anon, I used to say the same thing. What did I ever do to deserve this? But I came to realize this. And a lot of people I hear say we're special people in the program, and I disagree with that. But I think we're deserving people. That if we start working this program, doing the things that the program suggests as far as the steps, traditions, the concepts, we will find that we will lock into what I call a benevolent life that is beyond my dreams of ever having realized this. And it's because we're deserving of it as a result of our efforts, not because we're special, But my wife was sitting out there in the car, and I went back and I said, if it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't be experiencing things like this. She says, well, I knew someday you would appreciate me, I was at a newcomer Al-Anon meeting one time when a member of Alcoholics Anonymous was there for her first time. And she said, you sure talk a lot about the alcoholic here, don't you? And I said, well, don't you talk about your obsession when you go to AA? And she understood. So I've got to talk about my obsession, which was my wife and her drinking. She talks about her obsession, which was her drinking. And members of AA talk about their reaction to their obsession, to the obsession of alcohol. And I have to talk about my obsession and my reaction to my obsession, which was my wife. Now, if I just talk about what she did without my reacting, then all I'm doing is gossiping about her. But she was my obsession. Sometimes I describe Al-Anonism as the neurotic compulsion to stop the drinking of a person who has a neurotic compulsion to drink. And this is a losing proposition, really. When I'm so obsessed with somebody else's obsession, thinking I can get them out of their obsession, and this is the part of the insanity that we find in Al-Anon, I happen to be a step person. I believe some way or other God, through Bill W., gave mankind a mode of living, of correcting a lot of the past to make it possible to lock into the goodness of life. So I've been going to step study meetings for about 39 years of my time in Al-Anon, trying to comprehend really in depth of what this program really is and what it is not on just the surface. And in my years trying to understand the 12 steps, I see only one promise in those 12 steps, which is in the 12th step. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's the only promise I can see in those steps. It has nothing to do with stopping drinking, marriages, jobs, foreclosures, houses, kids going astray. It says if I work those and experience those 12 steps, I will have a spiritual awakening. Then I got to wondering, what's this spiritual awakening I'm supposed to experience as a result of these steps? I had read about Bill W.'s spiritual experience, the zapping experience he had, and other people, other mystics who have had this zapping experience. Nothing like that ever happened to me. But after about 7 years in the program, again following meditation one morning, I had what I call my first spiritual awakening. Now, I differentiate between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. A spiritual experience is something that happens out there. A spiritual awakening is something that happens internally there to change my life. And many times, a spiritual awakening can be caused by a spiritual experience. That's true. But my first spiritual awakening after about 7 years was the sudden realization that everything's okay. Now that sounds awfully simple intellectually. But I'm not talking about the intellect. I'm not talking about the transcendent feeling that I had within myself at that time that I have never lost since that experience. It totally changed my life and my perspective about what life was all about. Now, it doesn't mean that everything was rosy. It doesn't mean that at all. But I started to realize that all of my experiences, it was okay. Probably a good example was a woman who, I was sitting next to her at her second Al-Anon meeting. She had a violent alcoholic husband at home. And I said, it's okay. It's okay. She believed me. She trusted me. She didn't know how to drive. She came to her meeting on a bicycle. And she said that night on her way home, pedaling that bike, every time the pedal went down, she said, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And she got home, and her husband was passed out on the sofa. And she said, it's not okay. And she said it took her 3 years to understand that it was okay, because her perception of okay was that he would be sober in a 3-piece suit with a bouquet of flowers, take her out to dinner. But the okayness was that there was no violence that night because he was passed out on the sofa. So many times we go through what's called crap, thinking that it's not okay, except the crap has got a message there for us to learn. So everything's okay. My second spiritual awakening came when I was in the program about 11 years. And it was the same experience following meditation and the realization that every experience is a spiritual experience. The whole universe is spiritual. And I go through experiences, instead of trying to say it's good or bad, I now try to say, what's God trying to teach me in this experience? And that's what it's all about as far as I'm concerned. I find for me in my life today that I have an experience for one of two purposes. One is either to help me clarify some of the so-called wreckage and defects of character, as we call them in the program, to work through them, or in some manner to try to carry a message that contained in the Al-Anon program of holding my hand out to somebody else. Or it can be a combination of those two. So each one of us here is not here by accident. Life is a school. And God's trying to teach me through my experiences. You know, I can read all of this stuff. And I don't really know until I experience. Ron talked about it last night. Action is the magic word. For me to understand and know anything, I have to go through the experience. Other than that, it's just theory. So God gives me an experience to walk through to develop me as an individual, a spiritual being. And this is what it's all about as far as I'm concerned, you know. Probably in the last 30 years, there's one adverb that could describe me and my life, and that's a word called contentment. As a result of those two spiritual awakenings, I am contented with life. And it doesn't mean that everything has been rosy. But it does mean that, hey, let me look for the answer within the experience rather than to complain about it. I had a call one time from a past delegate in Southern California, Willie. Some of you people knew Willie. And he said he wanted to talk to me about some issues. Now, when I was growing up, we had problems. Anymore, we have issues. And I said, Willie, get rid of two words in your life, problems and issues, and replace them with experiences and opportunities. So he calls me now about some opportunities once in a while. But this is what it's all about, that we're so apt to complain about these things that we don't understand that we're being given an experience and an opportunity here, you know. One of my favorite experiences was I was down at Louisiana at a conference down there, and a woman came up to me and she wanted to talk to me about some problems that she was having in life. I said, well, fine, let's have breakfast tomorrow morning. And we got together for breakfast. And she went over all of these so-called problems, which are normal life experiences. And I was listening attentively, and I don't know whether you ever sponsor people, but if you listen to them very attentively, they get all excited because somebody's listening to them, you know. That's what she got. She got all excited. And then she started into the what if. The what if. And she said, well, what if this would happen? So that happened. She said, finally, she just blurted out. She said, Bob, what should I do? And with no hesitation, out came the words, why don't you eat your toast? Because she was sitting there holding this piece of toast in her hand. You see, at any point in our life, there's something we should be doing other than complaining about what's going to happen, you know. And she laughed, it broke it up, and everything. I found out later that everything that she was so complaining about had worked out. Sometimes, I get calls from people worrying about such and such. We talk it out, and et cetera, and they call the next week about another problem. I said, well, what happened on that other thing? The other problem you had. What problem are you talking about? I said, last week, this and this happened. It took care of itself. And this is what happens with life. If we come on back to the now, everything's okay. We get in trouble because we start thinking about the what if. I was brought up in school. I was taught I was a human being. And I lived my life as a human has been or a human will be. Never in the now. So the program here has given me the opportunity to really change my lifestyle. Adversity actually comes into our life giving us the opportunity to work the program. If you didn't have any adversity, you wouldn't have to work the program. If you didn't have any adversity, you would have been sitting down here. You would never come into the program. So adversity is absolutely necessary for our spiritual growth, This all happened. This all started actually about a little over 63 years ago. My wife and I have been married 63 years. That's in Southern California, that's considered a sin. But we were a couple of kids. I was going through Navy flight training. And I had met my wife at a small college in Nebraska for some pre-flight training. And then I went on down to Corpus Christi for some advanced training, and I had some time there, several days or a week, I guess, between training. And Goldine, who I'd corresponded with and talked to over the phone over the preceding year, came down to visit. And one night we were up in a hotel room having a party with a bottle of gin and another couple who on the sly had gotten married. Now, Navy cadets were not supposed to be married. It was an automatic washout if you found out you were married before you got your commission. And you couldn't get into the program if you were married. But this other couple on the sly had gotten married, and they thought it was pretty good, pretty nice. So they talked us into getting married. The other woman worked for a judge down in Corpus Christi, Texas. She called that judge, saying that Goldine and I wanted to get married. And the judge said he would go down to the courthouse the next day, get a license, and he'd find a minister, and we'd get married. And sure enough, this is what happened. We got married on a Sunday morning. I had to be back to base that night. Goldine had found an apartment. I always tell that story to tell you the power of sex and alcohol. You put those two things together, and anything can happen, you know. Goldine used to say that when she drank, everything seemed like a good idea. Quite a number of years ago, after sobriety, I recognized that my wife's personality and my personality are totally different. We're two different people. And I said, why did we ever get married? And she said, well, she was looking for security. And I said, I was looking for sex. And we called that love for 22 years. So it wasn't until we came into the program that we found out really what love really is. And that's what this whole program is about, is finding that thing called love. But we also found something that we could have a lot of fun by drinking. And I had about every 7 or 8 day off down there, and every time I had a day off, we would do the same thing. We would go out and buy a bottle, and we'd go out to a honky-tonk, and we'd have fun. We'd dance and drink and do all that stuff, you know. And this continued. Now, alcoholism for my wife did not suddenly occur overnight. It was a gradual, progressive type of a thing. And as time went on, she drank more and more. I drank a lot myself, but there was a difference between the two of us. See, I could drink and walk away from a half a glass of booze. She could not. And that's the difference between her being an alcoholic and my not being an alcoholic. And that's that the physical allergy which she had, which I did not have. And it took me years and years and years to understand the difference between the two of us from that physical standpoint, you know. But after a while, I'd got my commission. Here I was an officer now, and officers are always married to ladies. And sometimes about the social event, she wasn't acting ladylike. So I'd caution her verbally, and she wouldn't mind me. And so after a while, I had to go to more drastic means. I started using my Al-Anon elbow when nobody was looking. And as time progressed, there was a couple of times I'd pinch her when nobody was looking, you know, to straighten up. And a couple of times I hit her. Now, this was all for her benefit, you know, to straighten her up, you know. But over a period of 10, 15 years, the alcoholism really developed in her. And what happened as a result of that is I started drinking less so that I could watch more. And we were living in Long Beach at the time. I had gotten out of service after World War II, went back to college, and incidentally, while there in college, didn't have much money. But we always had enough money to chip in with somebody else to buy a bottle for a Saturday night party. Because alcohol was our life. It was our life. And I was recalled during the Korean War, and we ended up in Long Beach then. And this is where the alcoholism really started going, you know, and where all the problems started. We had a normal alcoholic home. We were going through the same thing that everybody else with an alcoholic home was going through. We had a next-door neighbor who drank a lot, So with his wife, we had a lot of parties together. And we'd go over his house. I'd take a bottle over there, and I'd say, let's save half of this for next week. And I couldn't understand why Frank and Goldine had to finish that bottle. But the nice thing about Al-Anon, and I sometimes disagree with a pamphlet which we have called Understanding Alcoholism. How can I understand alcoholism not being an alcoholic? So the Al-Anon program is not for me to have understanding, but for me to have acceptance. Understanding is an intellectual act. Acceptance is a spiritual act. So Al-Anon has tried to teach me acceptance rather than to understand, And then my wife started having these alcoholic behaviors. And I'd ask her these real potent Al-Anon questions. Why do you do it? And I'd get this stupid answer, I don't know. And I'd say, you do too know. And she'd say, I don't know. And this would lead us into meaningful discussions. And many times I'd tell her, if you're going to be like that, then get out. Get out. And she'd get in the other car and drive around the block, come back, promise not to do those things anymore. We'd kiss and make up, going to live happily ever after. And next week, the same thing. Get out, get out. And if she was gone too long, I'd get in the other car, try to find her, And sometimes I would punish her. I wouldn't talk to her. And we could go 2, 3, 4 days with not words spoken between the two of us. And Goldine used to say those are the happiest days of her life. I was the one with the mouth. But when I told her, why do you do it? And she'd say, I don't know. She didn't know because she didn't know at that time she was an alcoholic. You see? And that's why she did those things, because that was alcoholic behavior. But what was happening, a lot of chaos was starting in our home. After a while, my wife recognized that she might have a drinking problem. Our next-door neighbor, Frank, had gotten on the AA program. And my wife was watching him and his behavior, and he seemed to be straightening out his life. And she thought that, and I remember one time, she thought she might have that she might be an alcoholic. And I said, you're not an alcoholic. Just don't drink so much. And I couldn't understand why she could not just not drink so much, But after a while, she thought she should go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I was totally against it. I didn't know anything about it, but I was totally against it. And she started going to AA meetings with Frank next door. Now, Frank had been a friend of mine for quite a number of years, but he wasn't that good a friend where he'd be taking my wife out at night. What were they up to? So I really didn't give her any support in her AA program. I didn't understand it. And after about 30, 60 days, my wife suddenly realized AA was talking about total abstinence. By that time, alcohol was her life. And she suddenly dawned on her, AA was saying, hey, don't drink anymore at all. And that was totally against her, so she started drinking again. And for 2.5 years then, she was in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Couldn't stay sober, couldn't stay sober, couldn't stay sober. And by that time, our household was going down in the depths here. I was a very, very angry person. I was angry at her. I was angry at the work I was doing. I was angry at the people on the freeway. I was angry at everybody. Through the Al-Anon program, I came to realize the cause of my anger was my own lack of self-worth and my feeling of being threatened. I have yet to see somebody come into the 12-step program who has self-worth. That's the big obstacle, I think, self-worth. Now, if somebody would look at my behavior, they say, well, I got a lot of self-worth because I was an achiever. I did a lot of things that other people hadn't done. I'd set goals and do all that stuff. But all of this outside stuff was trying to validate me. And I couldn't get validation from doing the outside stuff because I lacked this self-worth. I used my wife to validate myself. That was not true love. I'd used her to try to validate myself. And what would people think of me because of her behavior and everything, And I became a very, very angry person, and angry at the kids, and it developed where I just wanted to get out. And I didn't know what I wanted to get out of. I never thought of suicide or anything like that, but I just wanted to get out of what I was. And, you come back to the bottom line. This was God directing my life without my realizing it. I've always felt that the pitchfork that you feel in the behind is not the devil. That's God trying to prod us on, But I was about ready. I had been working for this firm for about 8, 9, 10 years. And a two-man partnership. And I was about ready to leave it, and I didn't know what I was going to leave it for. And one of the partners found out about it, and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Riverside, California." I had a corresponding type of person in a business out there in Riverside. And this partner said he would grub stake us and open up an office out there. We had about 3 or 4 months advance notice before moving to Riverside. And prior to that, my wife said, "Leave me alone. Once we get to Riverside, I'll stop the drinking." And I believed that. And to this date, I don't remember too much about what happened during those 3 months because I was living on the promise. The big question that came to me following Al-Anon and looking at is, why do we believe the promise of the alcoholic? I'm sure the alcoholic wants to keep the promise, but due to the nature of the promise, they cannot keep the nature of their illness, they cannot keep the promise. But why do we believe the promise? As far as I was concerned, the basis of my happiness was a successful marriage. I didn't realize that until coming into Al-Anon, how much the fact that my parents divorced when I was a young teenager, had upon me. That some way or other I had instilled within me I was not going to have a marriage like my parents. I never thought that consciously, but it was in here. So I had to live in the promise. When my wife said she would promise to stop drinking, I had to believe it. And then she would break the promise and drink. And then she promised not to. All of those promises, and I'd come back, have to believe them, you see. Because she was the basis of my happiness. We will believe that which is the basis of our happiness. Alcohol was the basis of my wife's happiness. She believed in alcohol for her happiness. Now, I believed in her for my happiness. Both of us were disappointed by our belief. But we moved to Riverside. Nothing changed. I had become a bottle hunter. She was a bottle hider. We played that game. Following sobriety one time, I saw her pouring this bottle of vodka down the sink. And I said, "Well, hey, we might have guests sometime that want to drink." She says, "All it is water." She had found out that I was Mark, and so she'd fill it back up to that Mark with the water, And so she beat me at that game, too, But after a while, she started going back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started going to speaker meetings with her. And I could really identify with that speaker and her. And I'd give her the Al-Anon nudge. You listen to what that person's saying there, And on the way home, I'll go through all those salient points that she should be listening to, should be reminded of. And she'd give me this go-to-hell type of a look while I was sitting in the corner of a car. And next day she'd be drunk. And I couldn't understand it, And this went on for quite a while. After about a year in Riverside, I bought out the interest of that business and built an office onto our home so I could work from the house. And Goldane said the reason that she drank is she had never had any responsibility. She had always been a housewife, never worked outside the house. It made sense to me. So we put her on as a secretary. And the only thing that changed, instead of her being a drunken housewife, she was a drunken secretary, I was out in the field most of the time, and most of our business came in by telephone assignments. And I'd come home and hear a bunch of scribbling on a paper. I said, "What's that?" She said, "I don't know." And she had started her drinking in the morning to steady her hand because she had to take notes. And by the afternoon, she was in a blackout, And she talked about how crazy I was because I kept her for a year. But how that business ever survived, I'll never know. We had a 16-year-old daughter who wasn't minding me or Dad. And I tried to put some sense into her. And one time I told her, I said, "Barbie, you start minding me, you're going to have to get out of the house." And I knew she didn't have a choice. And the first thing I know, she had a little grip in a bag, and she's packing it. She walked out of the house at night. But in my smugness, I knew she'd be back because she needed her dad, And she didn't come back. And I thought, well, I better go find that little kid and put some sense into her. And I went looking for her, and I found her in a phone booth down by the freeway. And I went up to her, and I said, Barb, if you start minding me, you can come home. She said, Dad, I'm not coming home. And I didn't know what to say. You see, self-righteousness is a horrible, horrible illness. I didn't know what to say. Here I was trying to make her into a young lady, and she wasn't responding, et cetera, et cetera. And I left her there. And I went home realizing what was happening in our family. My wife was drunk every day, the daughter running away. Everything that we had tried over 20-some years to establish as a household was going down the drain. I'd like to talk a little bit about Barb because she has some experiences. She went to San Pedro, California, stayed with some friends, graduated from high school. Right out of high school, she married a young man who had a drinking problem and had 4 children. And after about 10 years of that marriage, some violence started. And for years we talked to her, Barb, why don't you go to Al-Anon? No, she didn't need Al-Anon, didn't need Al-Anon. And after the violence started, she called one night and she said, Dad, can I come home? And I was well enough versed in Al-Anon at that point to say, Barb, you can come home for a visit, but you can't come home to stay. Because I recognized that she was trying to run one more time from alcoholism. She had run from alcoholism in the house into alcoholism, and she wanted to run again from alcoholism in that marriage back. But as a result of my refusal to let her come home to live, she started going to Al-Anon. And as a result, she got her self-worth, she got her spiritual values. The marriage didn't last, which is okay. But she didn't run from it. She went to something better. And this, to me, is a very, very important principle. We can leave something as long as we're not going to run from it. Because she ran from alcoholism in our home into alcoholism, and she tried to run from that again. Some way or other, and I see this lots, is it possible that alcoholism is a benevolent illness given to us by God to transform our life, if we want to transform our life? Would we be sitting here for any other reason if we're looking for some spiritual values other than the fact that our lives have been affected by the disease of alcoholism? Is it possible then that God has brought alcoholism into our lives to force us, maybe against our will, to come in to find a new way of living? But coming back to what was happening in our life, one night, Goldine did something which hurt the male ego. I always like to point out I have never been hurt in my life, but my ego has taken a tremendous beating. And I've discovered my ego is not my friend. It's the thing that gets me into all my trouble. But my ego was hurt. And my wife, Goldine, was laying in the bed, passed out. And I was trying to figure out, what should I do? Should I kill her? Should I kill myself or kill both of us? And this is where my mind had gone. I've discovered this for me, that when I have a crazy thought like that, my higher power gives me a crazier thought to keep me from doing something crazy. And that was, what would the neighbors think if I killed her? They would know that ours was not a happy life. Because I was the protector of her. Nobody ever knew, from my knowledge, of what was going on in the household. We could put on this front when we were out with people, you know. A couple of months later, something else happened, similar. And this time I told Goldine to get out. And she went down to Long Beach to stay with those 2 people who were now in the AA Al-Anon program. And from Goldine's story, they were giving her 24 hours of AA through meetings, tapes, and people walking in and out of the house. And after about a week, Virginia, the woman down there, called and said, Bob, why don't you come down and see if we can reconcile? And I went down, laying out the 12 12 is a magical number. Did you know, a spiritual number? The 12 ways you get back in the house. And she agreed. But Virginia said something that night. Bob, had you ever thought of Al-Anon? Now, I had gone to AA speaker meetings, and undoubtedly the word Al-Anon must have been mentioned by somebody. But see, we hear what we need to hear when we need to hear it and not before. But I thought Al-Anon was some method by which I could get Goldine sober and keep her sober. So I agreed to go to a newcomers meeting down in Anaheim. And I walked in there, and they were all ladies. And this is my life in Al-Anon. Do you notice I'm the only man sitting up here? This is my life in Al-Anon. And I could tell they didn't have my problem. Because some of them were smiling. Some of them had sparkles in their eyes. And they started telling me I could not stop my wife from drinking. And I knew I could. I just needed the right method, and apparently Al-Anon was not it. So I was not impressed. But on the way home, Virginia said, before you make up your mind, try at least 6 meetings. And I said I would. I didn't realize how much of a people pleaser I was. I was stuck for 6 meetings because what would she think of me after I said I would if I didn't? But Goldine said she's never going to drink again. And came home, and she started her drinking again. And I started going to Al-Anon. The second meeting I went to, I met the first man in Al-Anon. That was down in Orange County. And I got there a little bit early, and I was listening to the conversation between he and some of the ladies. And I heard one of the ladies ask him, and how is your wife? And he says, she hasn't had a drink for 6 months. And I thought, well, what's he doing here? If his wife is not drinking, why is he here? And then he said the strangest thing I'd ever heard in my life up to that time. He said people at work were bugging him. He had to come back to find some serenity. And I thought, what the hell is he talking about? But I would hear strange things said by people with smiles on their face in this program that made no sense to me. But I would think about it, and I'd have what's called the aha experience. Have you ever had that? I get it. If you don't think you've ever had the aha experience, go back and read your literature, and you'll see it's been revised since the last time you read it. There are brand new thoughts in there that were never there before, And this is just merely the expansion of our consciousness, But I started going to Al-Anon, and I was given a gift. All these gifts are spiritual, primarily. And the gift I was given is that if I went to a meeting, I felt better. I had no explanation for it. All I knew is if I went to a meeting, I'd feel better. And it seemed then that the next day seemed to be better, too, if I went to an Al-Anon meeting. And that was one of the early gifts. And I'm still receiving those gifts by going to Al-Anon. Next week, it'll be 41 years since I started coming to Al-Anon. And I'm not finished yet. I still have things to do, But after about 6 weeks, I started feeling miserable. And I realized that Al-Anon had made me miserable. The way I like to put it is when you're miserable, don't know you're miserable, you're not nearly as miserable as when you're miserable and you know you're miserable. The story that I had in my life regarding anger involves a member of Alcoholics Anonymous who I detested. Every time I was around him, we'd get in a big argument. Whenever I thought about John incidentally, biblically means love. Well, there was none of that for me. And every time I thought of him, we'd get in this big argument and everything. And one time a person said, why don't you pray for John? I said, why should I pray for John? He said, do you like the knot in your stomach? He said, no, I don't like the knot in my stomach. I said, well, you better pray for him. I'll be damned if I will. But finally, the knot in my stomach became more unbearable than praying for him. So I started saying, God bless that son of a bitch. God bless that son of a bitch. And pretty soon the SOB dropped off, and I could sincerely say, God bless him, God bless him, God bless him. John started to change. I went up to John one time and said, John, I sure have to pray a lot for you. And he says, Bob, I have to pray a lot for you, too. What were we doing? This is a spiritual program. We were using spiritual means to change our attitude. John became a friend of mine, and that's the power of this program. We have kind of an interesting thing on the ODAT book on page October 4. I don't know how many times I'd read that page, but I hadn't really read it, if you know what I mean. And one time I read it, and I thought it was the biggest lie I have ever seen in print. I was going to write WSO to tell them to get rid of that lie. And then I realized it's the most profound thing on human relationships. It says down at the bottom of the page that if I work the 4th through the 10th step, the change in me will be reflected in every person who crosses my path. Wow. When I change, you change. When I change, the whole world changes. When I change, my perception of everything changes. That's the answer right here. A man some number of years ago said, love is the essence, beauty is the manifestation. Love is the essence, beauty is the manifestation. That if I use love as found in this program, I will find beauty out there as a result of it. I control the beauty in my life. You can help. There's no question about that. But the ultimate is my saying. I told that story about John the alcoholic at a conference one time, and a member of AA who was a psychologist came up to me and he says, it's all right to be angry as long as you handle it appropriately. And I said, yes, but isn't it better to have God remove my anger so that I don't have to handle it appropriately? Because from that instant with John, I became aware of when I was becoming angry. Then I have a choice. I have a choice of going through that anger outwardly, or holding it in, which are both destructive, or loving that which makes me angry. And that's the big thing that we have in this program, But I started recognizing then that there was some power within this program. I memorized the steps early. I could quote them. A newcomer would come in and say, you're powerless over alcohol. You can't stop that person from drinking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. After the meeting is over, I'd think, I wonder if Miss Goldine's been drinking. I wonder how much she's been drinking. I'd go home, get down on my hands and knees and find the bottle. Put another mark there. All the time thinking I was working the Al-Anon program. But I've discovered this for me. I do not work the steps work me. By that I mean my higher power, the God of my understanding, will bring a situation into my life for me to walk through and to find the lesson. We had a place down in Ensenada, Mexico, a lot of drinking going on down there, and my wife was trying not to drink, and she hadn't drank for maybe a week or so. And we went down to Ensenada that weekend, went over to some friend's house, and the first thing they did is they poured a drink for her and a drink for me. Up till that time, I would have taken that drink and said, I'm sorry she's not drinking, thank you. I would have drank it myself. I would have protected her from that alcohol. I was not thinking about Al-Anon. I was not thinking about the first step, but something with a capital S made me aware that that was her choice and not mine. And I sat back to see what took place between that drink and her. The best way I can describe it is almost like I was at an athletic event watching two teams play, but not concerned as to who was going to win. I was interested in the play. Is the drink going to win? Is she going to win? And I saw this look on her face. She was struggling not to take that drink. And finally she reached over, she picked up that drink, and she drank it. At that instant, something happened to me in the pit of my stomach. A flash started, and it went out the top of my head. And I can still remember. I didn't realize what that was for 30 days. But that was when I took the first step, or when the first step was given to me, because from that instant onward, I never tried to interfere with her drinking. I was free. I was free of my obsession, and she was free then of my interference with her obsession. And she was free to drink as she chose. And she was drinking a fifth of vodka a day and all the wine that she could handle by that time. And a drunken sot, really, what she was. And I thought one time she was drinking there at the breakfast at the breakfast table there, at breakfast, a bottle of vodka. And I thought, if she wants to drink herself to death, that's her choice. God gives us that choice as to whether we want to destroy ourselves. Did you know that? Why should we interfere with somebody else's choice, you know? And things kept getting worse and worse. One night, I was trying to read my Al-Anon book, and Goldine wanted to have an argument. They were yak, 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 yak. And boy, I wanted a backhand her. The little boy said, read your book, read your book, read your book. And I wanted a backhand her and yak, 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 yak. And I didn't react. And action and non-reaction is the magic word. And after a while, she let up. She went down into the bedroom, and pretty soon she walked back up. And as she went by me, she says, "At least I'm going to die beautiful." And I looked at her. There she was in a skimpy negligee, going out into the kitchen with the medicine cabinet, and I heard her fumbling around there, and I thought, my God, she's going to kill herself, going to commit suicide. And the little boy said, read your book, read your book, read your book. And she went back down to the bedroom, and thousands of thoughts were going through my mind. And had you ever thought that we do not think the thought, we only think about the thought? Think about that thought sometime. But here comes a thought, and it lodged. And it said, people are placed in particular places to save human lives. And I remembered the old home remedy. I went out, I got a bucket, got a glass of water, soaped it up, and a bar of soap, soaped up that glass of water, went down to the bedroom. She was passed out. I propped her up, poured this glass of soapy water down her throat, put my 2 fingers in the throat and her head in the bucket. And every time my fingers came out, I said, Bob, I didn't take anything. And that was the last time she ever threatened suicide. But one night at an Al-Anon meeting, I was complaining about this drunken secretary that I had. And a wise Al-Anon said, if she was other than your wife, would you keep her? I said, of course not. End of conversation, but not the end of thought. Why do we treat relatives differently than people? If she had been other than my wife, I would have fired her immediately for being drunk on the job. But I gave a lot of thought to that. I realized I could live in this situation. I was going to a lot of meetings. I was working, spending as little time at home as possible. We didn't have a household anymore. And I could live in that situation, but I realized there was something more to life than what I was experiencing. So I thought, I sat Goldane down and I said, I don't care whether you drink, but not in this house. And if you're going to drink, you're going to have to get out. And with that, I fired her. And I went about my business. And it took me about 3 days to realize that she had stopped her drinking. And she will have 41 years of sobriety in September. What happened spiritually? A lot of times we think this is a psychological program, a behavior modification program. If I do this and I expect that. This is a spiritual program. What spiritual forces came into that day and that incident? For me, the most important thing is I had become willing to give up the marriage. Now, the AA Big Book says had to become willing to go to any lengths for sobriety, and I'm sure the word sobriety is more than just not drinking. It doesn't say you have to go to those lengths. You have to only become willing to go to those lengths, which is an internal transformation. I had become willing to give up the marriage. Now, to give up that marriage, I had to replace it with something. What? I had become willing to let the relatives and the friends and neighbors know that ours was not a successful marriage. Spiritual pride. But I also had to replace that with something. And what was it that I had to replace it with? And that was my emotional comfortableness. My emotional comfortableness is my relationship with God. When I'm emotionally comfortable, I'm in a state attuned to God. When I'm disturbed by anything emotionally, I have backed off from God. So To be emotionally comfortable then became the answer. Where do I find that? In the 12 steps. Well, where are the 12 steps? In the Al-Anon program. Therefore, I put Al-Anon first priority in my life. And as a result of that, everything else has come about. Goldine puts AA first in her life. As a result of that, everything else comes about. My wife and I have not had an argument in 40 years in this program. It doesn't mean that we agree with everything. It has nothing to do with it. But we don't argue about our disagreements, you know. We're contented. We're happy. I love her very much. Hopefully she might care a little bit about me. One time we rented a condo over in Hawaii for a month. And I had some Al-Anon activities to take care of before I could join her. And she was over there. And I got a call from somebody. And during the conversation, I said, you know, Goldine's over in Hawaii. And she said, well, do you miss her? I said, no, I don't miss her. So you better not tell her that. I said, well, you don't understand. If I missed her, it meant that something was lacking in my life. And the now is always complete. It didn't mean that I don't care about my wife. But to miss her, no. Because I had things to do, and the woman said, oh, I understand. A short time later, I think it was that same day, I got a call, and here was this woman on his phone. Finally, I said, who is this? And she says, Bob, this is your wife, Goldine. And I thought, oh, my God. Didn't even recognize her voice. And I told her about this, and she says, Bob, I don't miss you either. You see? So both of us was doing what we were supposed to be doing, you know. And this is this all comes about the program, you know. We had don't have time to talk about this, but we had a refresher. We had a refresher course. A son, 6 years of age, when we got on the program, and about 12, 13, 14 years of age, he started his drinking and everything, full-blown alcoholic. You know, don't have time to tell about that. But he was my refresher course. I had to go through the same thing that I went through Goldine. One time he disappeared for 2.5 years. Didn't know where he was. And I said, God, is Steve dead or alive? Hadn't heard word one for 2.5 years. And 2 weeks later, after that prayer, get a letter from Steve. He had been over in Arizona, incidentally. And he says, I'm alive and well. You see how this program works? How this program works. When we asked him to leave home because of his drinking, I thought, how's he going to survive out there in that world? And I took that little pamphlet we have on detachment, and I read that every morning for 60 days until finally it clicked from here to there, and I was free. I had lost my trust and faith in the God of my understanding. I always like to mention an incident with Goldine. I was taking her inventory one time. I don't take inventories anymore. I make loving observations. But I was taking her inventory one time, and I realized she had never made amends to me. How could she be comfortable? How could she be sober having never made amends to me? Because don't we put the alcoholic number 1, 2, or 3 on our amends list? And I thought, let her work her program. You work your program, So I let it go. And a couple more years went by, and I walked in the kitchen one morning, and she was reading the AA Grapevine magazine. And as I went by, she said, Bob, have I ever made amends to you? And I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. I realized how long it was going to take, and I said, take a wide stance, get comfortable. So I folded my arms, backed up against the kitchen counter, and I said, no, you never have. And she says, well, I'm sorry, and she went back reading her book. Now, the point of that is this. What right do I have to expect anybody to make amends to me? If I'm expecting somebody to make amends to me, am I not holding on to a resentment? So my job is to clean up my side of the street, let the other person clean up their side of the street. I have a simple relationship with God. 2 words. Available, usable. I must become available so that God might find me usable. And that's the relationship. So I keep saying yes when asked to do things in Al-Anon. Yes always expands, and I could spend all day long talking about all the fantastic experience that I had by saying yes to Al-Anon. By saying yes. No always contracts. No always contracts. So part of the program says we tried to carry this message. Many people misquote that. They say we carry the message. It does not say that. Look at it closely. It says we tried to carry the message. Effort, not the result. God's responsible for the result. I'm responsible for the effort. So merely try to carry the message as it comes through me, and that's the name of the game. So I appreciate being here. Love you all. Thank you much. Thank you for the weather, too.